The banksters, they come in all shapes, colours and nationalities.
The Irish people have woken up.
The American investment bank Lehman Brothers has filed for bankruptcy in New York. That's happened in the last few minutes. It means the Wall Street institution, which has been in business for 150 years and survived the Great Depression, is now the most high-profile casualty of the credit crunch.
The president about to present a very dire warning to the American people. At stake, a loss of an enormous number of jobs, home ownership around the country, savings and retirement plans, and a deep recession.
Over the past few weeks, many Americans have felt anxiety about their finances and their future. I understand their worry and their frustration. We've seen triple-digit swings in the stock market. Major financial institutions have teetered on the edge of collapse, and some have failed.
The European Union and the IMF are to send a crisis team to Ireland, paving the way for a potential bailout. The Irish are still resisting, knowing that the only way to make it politically acceptable is to dress any agreement up as a bailout for its stricken banks rather than the government.
Over the weekend, the Department of Finance has been insisting there are no negotiations taking place on a bailout from Europe. They point out the state is fully funded until next year.
Studio now, the Minister for Justice and Law Reform, Dermot Ahern. So where is all this speculation from reputable international news organisations coming from? Is it just total fiction?
It is fiction.
Make it a first for me in this Parliament that any damn question would be answered.
We have not applied. There are no negotiations going on. If there were, obviously government would be aware of it, and we are not aware of it.
Well, earlier I spoke to the Irish Finance Minister, Brian Lenihan. I began by asking him whether he could guarantee that Ireland wouldn't have to go to the European Union for a bailout.
Absolutely. We intend to return to the markets next year, and we intend to fund ourselves. That's our plan.
Debt-stricken Ireland will receive a massive bailout of over $100 billion from the European Union and International Monetary Fund. It's the second emergency rescue package organised by the Eurozone after similar measures were taken for Greece.
Officials have already started to thrash out the details of the three-year package, but the amount is expected to be in the region of $125 billion. While EU finance ministers welcomed the request, Ireland's Prime Minister admitted the package will mean some changes for Irish banks and more economic hardship for taxpayers.
Put simply, the Irish banks will become significantly smaller than they have been in the past so that they can gradually be brought to stand on their own 2 feet once more.
Taoiseach, given the decision for the Dáil to sit beyond midnight, could I ask that the bar be closed or that a breathalyzer test be introduced for Chakti coming into
That's not on the order of business,
chamber?
I'm afraid.
In the bar that night, and I was drinking tea and coffee, and I wasn't on any horse.
On the order of business. Promise legislation. Only.
It's a hypocrite. Always a hypocrite. Always a hypocrite.
Sorry, could we please get back to the order of business, please? Sorry, Deputy, settle down, will you? On promise legislation.
I was the risk manager for Unicredito Italiano Dublin's operation in 2007. Unicredit is the biggest bank in Italy. We are talking about a very large bank. My crime My only crime was to comply with Irish law. I walked broad daylight, walked down to the regulator's office, the Central Bank of Ireland, and said, I am breaking the law. I am signing for billions that do not exist. In Ireland, there's an expression that says, no good deed goes unpunished. I was punished severely. I have not been able to work for 9 years.
This was meant to be a community. It is no longer a community. I was a supporter of the European Union, but since we had bank debt socialised and put on our shoulders to the tune of €70 billion, the Irish people have woken up to the fact that this union is no longer a union of the people. It is a union for bankers, for big business, but it certainly isn't for the smaller person. When the Act of Union between Britain and Ireland took place, Lord Byron said the following: there is only one relationship between a large state and a small state, and that is the relationship between a boa constrictor and its prey. I didn't think I'd ever come in here and say that, but sadly this union has proven that. We are for kicking, not for anything else, so it seems.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege. Thank you very much, Mr. Flanagan.
Statements were made, for example, by the CEO of Deutsche Bank, Josef Ackermann, who said the liquidity problems of Dublin-based DEPFA Bank last September brought the entire German banking system to within a hair's breadth of collapse. How come a bank in Dublin almost collapsed the entire German system?
I'd like to bring your attention to a matter that has been totally ignored by the Irish and the European media: the destruction of thousands of millions of euros. It began in March 2011 when €3 billion was destroyed, resumed last year with the destruction of a further €1 billion in two tranches of €500 million each. This obscenity is the legacy of the bailout in 2010 of the failed institutional investors in two failed Irish banks. It served its purpose, bought some time for the euro, prevented the onset of the feared contagion had those banks been allowed to fail. There was a fallout, however: the insistence by the ECB that because the Irish Central Bank printed that money, that must now be taken back. And so you have this obscene situation where a broke, hugely indebted country, where the austerity programme has already wrought havoc, especially among those who can least afford it, is forced to borrow thousands of millions to destroy. The social repercussions of the bank bailout cost in Ireland have been horrendous. Record numbers lying on trolleys, growing numbers suffering from depression, growing numbers taking their own lives, 250,000 emigrating. I ask you please, as a priority, to have a look at this abomination. You talk about confidence in the European institutions. People in Ireland cannot have confidence until this changes.
Deutsche Pfandbriefbank. Did anybody know that this was the biggest bank in Ireland in the last 10 years? Why do people not know this? Why are people so intimidated? I'll tell you why. Because they get threatened, like I did, in writing by UniCredit's lawyers, verbally on more than one occasion, and threatened by utter silence.
The LIBOR rate fixing scandal told us all we need to know about the ethics and morals of the finance industry at the very top. We should in fact be going much further than we're going, and the fingerprints of the industry are all over the legislation, also the power of their lobbyists.
The silence is what is working against us. The lack of cooperation is also working against us.
Given Ireland's experience of both terrorism and the abuse of the financial system, prevention of the use of the financial system for the purpose of money laundering and terrorist financing is something that should be close to the heart of every Irish person. I don't have to elaborate on how physical terrorism affected Ireland for decades, and there are those who still haven't been weaned off it just yet. But there is also another kind of terrorism that is far more widespread and far more endemic. I'm talking about financial terrorism, the terror inflicted on peoples all over the world by small but disproportionately powerful moneyed interests whose actions are facilitated by captured governments. Our own government in Ireland has long been captured and is now held prisoner by the IFSC, dancing to its every tune. The same financial centre which is so low down on the scale, or so high, depending on your perspective, that it was described by no less an outlet than the New York Times as the Wild West of finance. It's good to see something being done about it, but the idea that the European Union can do anything about it, given that it's a type of financial terrorist itself, well, that's a joke, isn't it?
The Central Bank of Ireland refused to go on record. It might have something to do with the fact that the chairman of my bank in Ireland, after this happened, after I reported a breach of billions, was appointed as a director to the Central Bank of Ireland.
Ireland has 130,000 children living in poverty. What the European Union is doing to Ireland is the equivalent of a burglar coming around to your house, robbing all your money, robbing all your food, robbing all your goods, and then giving you a little bit back, bit by bit, to feed your children. Remember, while this school scheme is going on, last year Ireland was forced to borrow in 2 tranches €500 million and destroy it. It would have fed an awful lot of children. This is complete and utter hypocrisy. Thank you.
The citizens of Ireland have been going through unbelievable austerity in the last decade for bailing out a bank called Anglo-Irish Bank. Most people in Ireland never had anything to do with Anglo-Irish Bank.
When it comes to the sustainability of the Irish Health Service, it is quite clear that it is not sustainable. And one of the reasons is because we are hemorrhaging money paying for the collapse of a banking system, a system that collapsed, but we paid the price for it and not the speculators.
As long as the bonuses were being paid out for so-called success in Ireland, there were no questions asked.
How can you have a sustainable healthcare system when the taxation that is paid for our health and for our education is spent on paying back a debt that never was ours? In 2016 we'll have to pay €500 million a year again and burn it. Same in 2017, same in 2018. How the hell can that be sustainable? I thought you were here to help us. You are hemorrhaging us, you are destroying us, you are killing us.
But the question is, when Brian Lenihan said the Central Bank of Ireland is cooperating, can anybody confirm that the Central Bank of Ireland actually informed Banca d'Italia, the Central Bank of Italy, that the biggest bank in Italy had a petulant child in Ireland that didn't know how much money it has? The governor of Banca d'Italia at that time was a Mr. Mario Draghi. I'm sure Mario Draghi can be found and asked.
Draghi, the recently published report of the Banking Inquiry in Ireland points an accusatory finger directly at the ECB. Estimates that over €9 billion could have been saved on applying haircuts to the unsecured, unguaranteed bondholders, but for the threats and bullying of your predecessor, Mr. Trichet. That €9 billion is gone, history, but there is an even greater injustice happening to Ireland right now under your watch, Mr. Draghi. I'm referring to the ongoing destruction of the €31 billion promissory note bonds. Those bonds were created in 2009 and 10 to bail out the creditors of 2 insolvent Irish banks, but more significantly, to help protect the euro itself. The banks were non-systemic. Those banks were eventually liquidated, but the ECB now insists that the entire €31 billion must be taken out of circulation by our central bank. Already we borrowed €6 billion. Our central bank is now going to be forced to burn €25 billion more.
There is much to be done. There is no point in making more laws if the ones that exist are not enforced. Thank you very much.
Please answer this question. I'm asking you today directly. Will you please work with us to stop this obscenity? Do not let this be your legacy to Ireland or our legacy to our children. Please answer this question. Make it a first for me in this Parliament that any damn question would be answered.